Welcome back to the modern mystic, where we fall asleep inside the quiet lives of history's greatest minds. Tonight, we spend time with Carl Sagan to explore his nightly rituals, his gentle devotion to wonder, and the ordinary textures that shaped his evenings. What if genius was quiet? What if the real legacy lived in patience, not spectacle? What if greatness was found in the slowest hours of the night? This isn't a story. It's a slow remembrance. Each moment is rooted in Carl's real life, recollected gently, never rushed. If you've ever felt too slow for this world, or wondered if your own quiet habits have meaning, this episode is here to help you feel understood. There's nothing you have to do. Even if you drift off, the heart of this message will stay with you quietly. No need to focus. Let your mind rest, let the life unfold, and allow yourself to be carried into Carl Sagan's night. A faded street in Brooklyn, the morning air slipping through a cracked window, carrying the sounds of distant trolley cars and the shuffle of shoes on concrete. In a fourth-floor walk-up, a small child called Carl pressed his fingertips to the glass, watching sunlight spill across the wooden kitchen table. The year was 1934. He was born to two gentle parents, Sam and Rachel, who kept the flat warm with stories and simple meals. Rice pudding, boiled potatoes, a small bowl of apples picked from a pushcart on the avenue early mornings. The cold linoleum made his toes curl, but curiosity kept him moving. Books, battered at the corners, sat stacked beneath the radiator. His mother saved every picture of planets she found in the Sunday edition. Sometimes she clipped them with silver scissors as steam curled from a chipped enamel kettle, filling the room with the scent of strong, dark tea. He turned the pictures over with careful hands, hands too small to hold the sky, though he would always try. In those first years, the world felt enormous yet close. The fabric of the chair, the click of the stove, the hush that settled just before dusk. Carl would sit on the fire escape, knees drawn to his chest, feeling the metal cool under his clothes as evening came. Across the city, neon signs flickered to life and windows blinked open like constellations between tenement rooftops. On summer nights, his father would point to the pinprick lights above. Venus, maybe, or just the faded lamp of a neighbor upstairs, and trace stories for him in the air. There were no telescopes yet, just the pull of wonder and the comforting weight of his father's arm. The city buzzed below, but up here it was quieter. The only sound his own steady breath and the distant hum of streetcars fading into night. The 1930s and 40s moved slowly in Brooklyn, their softness marked in bread lines and radio static, evenings spent in the warm glow of a kitchen bulb. Carl's mind lingered on the small, ordinary things, a stray dog nosing through garbage cans, rain tapping patterns on the fire escape, the scent of laundry soap rising from the basement. But it was always the sky, seen through a veil of city haze, that called him further out. He would turn a paper cup upside down, imagining the curvature of a planet, marveling at how something so small could suggest a universe so vast. Within these quiet routines, a certain humility grew, knowing how much of life is shaped by repetition, by waiting, by noticing the slow change of light across a table. Years later, he would speak of the cosmos not as a place far away, but as something woven into every breath, every fold of a curtain, every grain of dust on a Brooklyn window ledge. You can almost feel the warmth of those evenings, a cup pressed between both hands, the future unknown and somehow endless. A boy's hand presses against the window pane, the glass cool in the pale New York dusk. Carl Sagan is small, too small for the world he would come to describe, yet the shape of his longing is already etched around his gestures. Outside, city lights blink on. The room holds a quiet clutter. Library books stacked with their musty sweetness, a battered wooden desk that wobbles gently when he leans his elbows, and the distant rumble of a train echoing through the floorboards. Every sound is ordinary, but to him it's a signal of something larger. The dust glimmers in the last light of day. He waits, watching, listening for what might arrive through stillness more than motion. He turns the page of a borrowed book, crisp, tinged with a library's quiet history. The print is dense, a little hard for a child's eyes, but he reads anyway, a fingertip tracing each word as if it's a path across a map. There are small facts about planets, drawings of moons. In the hush, he does not care that the facts are meant for adults. The important thing is how each sentence opens space inside his mind, how the language feels slightly strange, as if it belongs to another world, and yet somehow guides him gently home. A single lamp burns on the desk, the shade colored like old bone. Its warmth pools in the center of the room, leaving the corners dim, almost invisible. Here, Carl's mother, Rachel, sits quietly, patching a tear in his coat. The slow thread, the sound of needle pricking cloth, reminds him that life is made of both distant galaxies and mended pockets. He watches her hands move, soft and certain, and feels tethered, not just to his family, but to the ritual of care. The room smells of boiled potatoes and steam, city water, a comfort too simple to describe. He lifts his eyes and sees his father, Sam, returning with a small sack of groceries, shoes leaving faint patterns on the worn linoleum. In this evening tableau, the wonder is not dramatic. It is not about meteors streaking overhead or secrets waiting to be uncovered. The wonder arrives in slow increments, a father unwrapping fruit, a mother smoothing worn wool, a child gazing past the boundaries of his windowsill. Inwardly, Carl learns to receive the present moment exactly as it is, without demand for more. The contentment isn't always complete, but it is whole, like a puzzle with a single missing piece that invites curiosity, not restlessness. At the kitchen table, there are stories. Carl's father, with his accent softened by years in America, describes old rituals from the garment district, tales of poverty edged with humor. Carl sits quietly, hands folded over a sheet of newsprint covered in numbers and puzzles. He looks first at his father's shoes, then at the grey bowl in front of him, then at the window again. He lets the rhythm of story and silence merge, holding them both inside, not splitting the world into useful and useless, but letting it all linger side by side. Time slows in these rooms, as it often does in childhood memories. The sound of a faucet dripping becomes a kind of music. The worn radiator ticks and sighs, then settles. In these moments, the longing in Carl's small heart is less about escape and more about leaning into the quiet mystery, wonder that feels like both a question and an answer, shaped by patience more than by striving. As dusk deepens and the first star appears over the rooftops, Carl presses his hand to the glass again. The city is vast, but not impersonal. Every window holds a gentle, flickering life. He cannot know what will unfold, or how his early questions will shape whole worlds. He understands this much, that every soul, when held in gentle attention, begins to move quietly toward its own belonging. Wonder is not a single moment or a burst of inspiration. It grows slowly inside the rituals of ordinary evenings. The soul's compass for Carl and for all of us turns not in pursuit of distant greatness, but in a returning, again and again, to the slow presence of the here and now. Each memory becomes a soft lantern, guiding us forward, even when everything outside grows dim. There is a small apartment in Brooklyn, New York. The kitchen table is worn, its wood soft at the edges, marked by years of breakfast crumbs and elbows. Rachel Sagan stands by the window, steam rising from a pot of water, her movements quiet and measured. A boy, Carl, sits nearby, his hands flat on an open magazine, the paper smooth and cool beneath his fingers. The morning is ordinary. Sunlight rests across the linoleum floor. The distant clatter of city life pulses through the glass. His mother, Rachel, watches him with the kind of patience that waits and listens. She sees the way he tips his head, his questions tumbling out softly, never rushed. There is no hurry in her replies. She answers each one with a steady calm, pouring her attention as carefully as the hot water into her chipped mug. Rachel believes in allowing wonder to grow. She lets silence linger after each question, as if to water the roots. Nearby, Samuel Sagan folds yesterday's newspaper with broad, careful hands. The ink sometimes stains his fingers. He works long days, but at night and on weekends he is present, reliable as the sturdy wooden chair he settles into. He is a garment worker, his days measured by fabric and thread, but at home he is generous with time. Samuel's stories carry the heft of practicality and gentle optimism. He reminds his son that the world rewards those who persist, that curiosity is worthwhile, even if it's quiet and slow. The apartment is small, the walls close but not stifling. Each shelf holds books stacked sideways, encyclopedias worn at the spines, the air holding a faint trace of old paper. Rachel reads aloud sometimes in the evenings, her voice steady and rhythmical. Samuel sits quietly, his presence a comfort, the steady click of knitting needles or the low shuffle of cards at the kitchen table. It is a home shaped not by wealth, but by affirmation. Encouragement is given freely, like extra helpings at dinner. Mistakes are softened by patience, and questions are never unwelcome. There are pauses between activity. Rachel's gaze steady on her son as he tries to sketch the shape of Saturn on a yellowed notepad, the graphite dull and cheap, but held with care. Samuel stands by the door, coat in hand, pausing to watch. He nods, wordless, but his approval is as quiet and strong as the weight of the old winter coat he wears, second-hand but dependable. At night, the apartment dims. The kitchen's silverware is stacked and put away, plates drying by the open window. Carl sits cross-legged on the living room rug, the fabric soft and thin. Rachel joins him on the floor, showing him how to fold a paper airplane. Samuel lowers himself to the couch, sighing, the springs creaking. Together they watch the paper glider sail from hand to hand, its small journey illuminated by a single lamp. There is no rush to clean up, no expectation to hurry. In these quiet evenings, the Sagan home feels held together by tenderness and routine. It is here, among the hum of traffic and the warmth of his parents' steady regard, that Carl's curiosity is allowed to become a daily, living thing. Questions are not only answered, they are honored. There is time to think, to listen, to ask again. In this home, greatness is slow, shaped quietly by ordinary hands, and given space to take root beneath the steady evening light. A ceramic lamp glows against a wooden shelf. The evening has pulled the Sagan house into a smaller, warmer world. The soft thud of slippers on linoleum from the kitchen, a cup resting on a counter beside an open notebook. Each member of the family drifts into this gentle rhythm without needing a reminder, shaped quietly over years by loving repetition. Karl, not yet a man of renown, sits at the worn table with his father's presence nearby. The older Sagan stands, easing open a package of graphite pencils. He sets one beside Karl. The air holds a trace of floor polish and the faint starch of his shirt. Lessons tonight are not declarations, but invitations, an outstretched hand to look, to wonder, to trace a map of stars between sips of cocoa. No words about destiny, only patience and presence, a silent offering that carries farther than instruction ever has. The table's varnish is cracked where elbows have rested on winter nights. Here, sometimes his mother joins, her voice steady as she reads out loud. Her hand traces the margin of a page, pausing for meaning, letting stillness shape her lines. Karl listens, the hush of her reading settling along his shoulders. Guidance is rarely loud. It's woven through the small acts, a bowl rinsed, a question asked, a lamp shade tilted to cut the glare. Each gesture an unhurried tending, each silence a fertile space for spirit to grow. In the bedroom down the hall, there's the scratch of pencil on cheap note paper. Karl copies passages from encyclopedias, drawn not only by the facts, but by the shape of his mother's encouragement. She stands behind him once, hands gentle on his back. She does not demand speed, but believes quietly that his curiosity is a gift to be honored on clear nights. The family slips into heavy coats. Karl's father opens the apartment window, letting city air and the faint smell of tar and winter into the room. The telescope is old but kept in good repair, each part oiled and cared for like a ritual. Karl lifts the cover, breath clouding as he peers upward. The stars above seem distant, yet the feeling is one of nearness, a kind of tending from beyond. The universe offering itself, not all at once, but in gentle increments, much like a parent's love. These routines are not inventions, they are ancient. A creator, too, moves slowly, folding greatness into the ordinary, hiding it in years of soft repetition and unnoticed nurture. It is not the finish that matters, but the faithfulness, returning night after night to nurture what is not yet visible. Like a sapling under a gardener's watch, a soul finds its path not from command, but from being tended gently over the silent years. Through the lamp's golden circle, Sagan learns what all beloved children do. That destiny unfolds through hands that steady, eyes that linger, and hearts that wait for growth. In quiet hope years blend together. One evening, one gesture, one gaze at the winter sky after another. It is not the large moments that shape a life, but the soft patience that echoes the rhythm of something greater, rooting wonder where spirit grows best, in silence, in safety, in loving presence. He will carry this belonging into every book, every search for meaning, every night spent peering out at the stars. As destiny gathers, it is shaped not by force, but by the sacred art of tending, slow, humble, and faithful enough to make space for the soul to remember its own becoming. A pile of textbooks leans quietly at the edge of a slim wooden desk, each spine worn down from nights pressed flat beneath Karl's forearms. The soft scratch of a pen moves through ruled paper, drifting across names: Copernicus, Galileo, Tyndall. Outside the apartment window, a faint city glow filters in through sheer curtains. The radiator hums low in the background, keeping time with the rise and fall of Carl's breathing. He pauses, rubbing his thumb over a margin note. The ink smears a little, leaving a gentle blur on the page. He is still young, though his hair is already thick and unruly, resisting any neat parting. There's a draft coming through the window, just enough to bring in the scent of old pavement and rain. His notebook stays open well past midnight, edges curled from months of use. The table lamp casts a small circle of yellow, enough to see his notes, not enough to see the room. In the hush, Coral flips to another page and copies down a passage about Mars, his hand steady, his eyes a little distant. He keeps returning to ideas he can't outgrow. Worlds waiting beyond the blue, patterns beneath the chaos, the ache of not knowing if anyone, anywhere, looks back. The apartment is never truly silent, but there's a softness in these hours, a place where longing grows familiar. A mug cools by his elbow, half-drunk tea the color of amber. He stares at it between sentences, turning over questions that settle heavier than the answers. Even as his body grows tired, his mind stretches. What else might live out there? Why, in all this darkness, does the heart keep reaching? In the college library, his footfalls are quiet on the wax tile floor. Rows of shelved journals, faintly dusted, fill the space with the scent of paper and binding glue. Carl leans against a cool window pane, reading an old astronomy treatise. He traces lines in diagrams of planetary orbits, fingertip gliding across the thin paper, searching for a sign, something that says the universe wants to be known. Sometimes the ache of mystery stirs more deeply than the pleasure of answers. When dusk falls outside, stripes of violet shadow slip through the glass, brushing his notebook and shoulder. He arrives again and again at that silent curiosity. It is both wound and wonder, the way a question opens and refuses to close. He looks up from the table sometimes, attention falling on the slant of light in the hallway or the row of empty study carrels, thinking that every discovery begins here on nights when nothing seems to move except for longing itself. Carl is not in a hurry, not yet. He learns to honor the strange pull inside him, the slow ache toward something vast and unseen. He writes another question in the margins. The pen glides. The longing lingers. Carl sits alone at his desk, a stack of well-worn notepads resting beneath his hand. The lamplight is low, sifting against the outline of his teacup, the faint rim of steam dissolving into the quiet of the room. His fingers hover above a page, pausing as he listens to a hum beneath the silence. There's always been a kind of ache tracing his evenings, a pull that goes beyond the science, beyond the facts, further than the careful calculations and star maps. It is the slow, familiar ache of wanting to know, to belong, to reach toward something that can never quite fit inside language or lines. He looks out the frost-laced window, breath kissing the cold glass. Against the indigo night, the telescope stands in its corner, old varnished wood, the smell of oil and faint metal. Its presence is both invitation and reminder. He remembers being a boy, lying on a Brooklyn rooftop, watching the stars through city haze. Wonder was new then, but the longing already lived inside him. It isn't a loneliness. It's a quiet signal, a sense that some part of him remembers a home that is not here and not found in any charted sky. Carl's hands move again, turning the notebook. His pen makes a soft, scraping sound. He isn't trying to solve the universe tonight. He just follows where longing leads. Every question opens another, each thought a tether stretching past the paper, past the room, gently into the unknown. It feels like being an empty reed, shaped for something vast to move through, never fully his, always just passing through, always incomplete. The ache is holy, not painful. It points, soft and endless, beyond the next page, beyond comprehension, toward meaning that is felt more than spoken. As the hours stretch, the study grows quieter. There is only the sound of the pen gliding, a chair faintly creaking beneath him, and the certainty that this longing, this yearning for the infinite, was never to be filled. It is a signal, a quiet shadow on the heart that says there is more to belong to, more to love, more beyond the edge of knowing, to be drawn not by answers, but by the slow unfolding of wonder itself. He closes his notebook, hands warming the leather cover. The ache does not resolve, but softens into presence. Karl lets himself rest inside the longing. It is not absence, but the gentle proof of the soul's deeper home, a quiet promise held just beyond the stars outside. The late autumn wind pressed gently against the rusted frame of the observatory window. Inside, the desk lamp cast a ring of tired light across piles of correspondence, committee drafts, and the smooth, unbothered grain of the wooden desktop. Carl Sagan's hand moved across a page, slow and practiced, pausing over the tone of a letter, a gentle question pushed back by cautious colleagues. Tonight, every scratch of his pen against paper echoed with the weight of an institution's doubts, not praise. NASA, in its early decades, moved carefully, and Sagan's young voice, suggesting that planets like Venus might be shaped by thick heat-trapping atmospheres, sounded unfamiliar, even suspect, to the gray flannel stability of certain rooms. Some reports came back with cool silence, some with the soft edge of skepticism. A memo, folded neatly, set aside in a drawer. The texture of paper between finger and thumb was sometimes the only answer he received. He leaned back in his old wooden chair, the surface worn smooth from nights just like this, and read over comments from a journal reviewer who doubted the models, doubted the measurements, doubted the nerve it took to suggest something as enormous as climate change on another world, or this one. The ticking of a small mechanical clock on his bookshelf filled the space. Sagan had known, from hours spent in the stillness of libraries, that most new ideas met a draft of chilly air before they ever saw the warmth of acceptance. The humility pressed into each breath. On nights of heavier rejection, he'd make tea in a battered copper kettle. The water hissed quietly across the gas flame, filling his small kitchen with the scent of steam and a reminder that the world did not stop for disappointment. The telescope waited by the back window, the old canvas cover folded neatly on a stepladder. Sagan would drape his long coat over his shoulders and step barefoot across the cold, tiled floor to the porch. There, against the hush, he could let his mind settle into the slow rhythm of the sky and let go, for a moment, of the slow resistance waiting for him at every institutional door. Yet each time his work was questioned, Sagan returned with a steadier focus. It was not defiance, just the quiet rhythm of returning. He understood as the faint hum of distant equipment reminded him that the universe did not hurry. That meaning was born most often from persistence, not victory. And through his windows, past the streaked glass and into the slow-turning dark, he could trace the constellations, remembering that every shift in scientific thought had begun with a long winter's wait, a moment of almost being turned away. The hush of a closing notebook, the warmth of mismatched wool socks, the clink of ceramic against wood. In these, Sagan found pause, not defeat. As the echoes of debate lingered in the halls of memory, he kept his pace slow, trusting that, eventually, the world would notice the patience behind the wonder. A window pane reflected the steady glow of a desk lamp, cool air moving above stacks of rejected manuscripts. Carl's thumb brushed the corner of a yellowed envelope, feeling its creases, remembering the nights of hope that turned to silence. 10 letters returned unopened, each one heavier than the last. Outside, the soft call of distant traffic marked the time. His breath rose and fell, slower than it once was, deeper, more sure, even amidst uncertainty. He reached for his chipped teacup, its glaze worn thin by countless evenings. The rim touched his lips with the familiar reassurance of routine. Each setback had the same texture, disappointment, thick like cooled tea. Disappointment met with the low hum of persistence. He remembered being told again that his voice was too speculative, that he asked too much of the ordinary. Still, he set the cup down and turned the page. The grain of the wood beneath his forearm steadied him, a quiet anchor through cycles of doubt and determination. A notebook rested across his lap, its cover rough from use. Fingers traced the spine, lingering on the impressions left behind by failures, outlines of learning, not shame. He thought about how pressure for quick answers had never rendered meaning that lasted. The pages, filled with scratched-out diagrams and lines of reworked prose, became evidence of resilience shaped over years, not weeks. Each error, each resistance, was a gentle shaping. Obstacles did not break the vessel, they slowly refined it so it could bear more light and more darkness together. In the hush of his study, he relearned quiet humility with every setback. There were moments when he watched dust drift across a shaft of lamplight, recognizing how nothing, no achievement, no failure, remained unchanged. All moved, all shifted, all dissolved with time. His nights grew patient, the need for quick validation replaced with a steady acceptance that effort is not wasted. It becomes part of the soul's tone, deepening over years. He learned to sit longer with uncertainty, feeling the smoothness of his worn sweater sleeve, accepting that everything is refined slowly. Resistance made him softer inside, not weaker, not undone, even as the world pressed for more, for certainty, for perfection. He realized that meaning was found in the patient returning, showing up again and again as dawn waited outside the frosted glass. Even disappointment became part of the fabric, woven in with devotion and waiting. The sacred lesson was not to escape obstacles, but to allow them to teach endurance, a kind that did not close the heart, but opened it wider with every test of time. There is the familiar creak of Carl Sagan's wooden chair as he settles in for the evening. Even after all these years, the way the chair yields just a little beneath his weight is a comfort. He slides his notebook, a well-loved, stained hardback, across the desk. The paper has its own quiet texture, resisting the nib of his pen with a pleasant softness. Before he writes, he smooths the page with his palm, patient, unhurried. His tea sits close by, faintly steaming in the late hour. Tonight is no different from so many others. The scent of leaves steeped in water, the gentle ticking of the study clock, the world outside veiled in a quiet cold. Every evening there is a routine, not done for an audience, but out of discipline, a practice as regular as breath. He begins by opening the day's astronomical logs, pages filled with neat columns of observation times, temperatures, results. He copies the necessary figures into his own spiral-bound record, the graphite squeaking faintly. Precision is a slow accumulation, he reminds himself. A habit, not a burst. Often he reviews the calculations twice, cross-referencing notes from the Cornell Observatory. Sometimes he finds nothing new. Still, he records it all, word by word, number by number. The room smells faintly of old paper and graphite, with hints of flannel from the blanket draped across his knees. A small lamp casts its pool of light, just enough for the task at hand. He reads through last week's writing, a draft of a letter, not meant for anyone in particular, but for clarity of thought. Outside, winter presses against the window. The pain fogs with his breath as he pauses, thinking of the order to his arguments, the steadiness of tone. He takes down a volume of poetry, its cover worn at the edges, and lets the words move through him, remembering that repetition is not just for data, but also for meaning. He writes in longhand, his script legible but unhurried, sentences looping patiently to the edge of each page. Sometimes, in the margin, he jots questions, a habit from university days. Can this be clearer? Could this be simpler? The ritual is the answer, carried out night after night. Practice isn't glamorous or quick. It is the gentle weight of the same motions, the promise embedded in familiar things. His work is not about discovering something new every night, but about honoring the possibility of discovery, to persevere, to prepare the soil for insight. There is a spiritual rhythm in this. Every notation, every repeated observation is a form of devotion, a declaration that the universe rewards patience above cleverness. The tea cools slowly. The lamp hums. The thick notebook gathers the story, line by line, and outside, patiently, the sky waits. The old teacup settles quietly onto the wooden desk, its warmth gradually leaving shallow rings on the grain, just as it did the evening before and the week before that. Carl sits very still, spine loosely untwisted, hands folded softly in his lap. The distant hum from the observatory filters through a cracked window, a steady line of sound marking the perimeter of the quiet tonight, as every night he returns to the ritual of his notes. The paper of the notebook is faintly rough, corners bent from years of use. The act of opening to a fresh page is both a beginning and a continuation, each line inscribed, not for brilliance, but for being tethered to habit. Repetition, he noticed, does not diminish the meaning of these gestures. Instead, it links the present self to yesterday and to all the nights before, like beads on a string, each identical, each necessary. The faint sound of graphite across paper is joined by the subtlest exhale, his breath moving in rhythm with the words. A pause. Another sentence, written softly under the lamplight. Outside, frost begins to frame the edges of the glass, catching the light of distant stars. The air in the room is still. Every repeated motion, uncapping the pen, adjusting the angle of the lamp, tracing a finger across old notes, becomes a silent way of aligning mind and body to something unchanged. There is comfort in the sameness, a knowing that mastery is not a flash but a slow folding of time over and over again. Each act, however mundane, is a type of presence, an offering to the night and to the universe beyond the window. He reads a passage from an old volume, words familiar from 100 readings, the rustle of its pages thin as linen. He does not hurry. In the gentle tread of ritual, the self softens. The spirit comes to rest in repetition, learning to serve something both ancient and ordinary. The quiet order that lingers after a thought, after a word, after a cup placed slowly down tonight. As with every night, the sacred rhythm persists. Nothing is exact, yet everything returns. A life lived this way, Carl reflects, is shaped not by the rare occasion, but by what is returned to night after night. In these recurring motions, so small as to be almost invisible, the mind is smoothed, the heart is readied. Practice, he finds, is not an aiming, but a returning. Service is born in the willing repetition of these moments. The page fills with quiet notes. The teacup is lifted, warmth pressed between palms. Breath drifts, and tomorrow's memory is gently marked. The night stretches onward with the promise of another repetition. Nothing hurried, nothing forced, just the slow, sacred shape of one evening returning to the next. There is a hush that settles in the corner of Carl Sagan's study as evening folds in upon itself. Wool socks graze the polished wood floor, quieter than breath, as he moves slowly toward the sectioned cupboard where his tea waits, a ritual as unchanged as the phases of the moon. He always chooses the same mug, chipped at the rim, once a gift from a friend he hasn't seen in years. The kettle is heavy in his hand as water fills it, and for a moment he watches the surface swirl under the tap. The steam begins to rise, faint at first, carrying the shadowy fragrance of dried leaves and memory. Beside his armchair sits a weathered notebook, its leather worn soft by years of turning pages with careful fingertips. The weight of it, familiar, grounds him as he sits, always at an angle, with legs drawn near beneath a faded wool blanket. The lamplight is muted, golden, reflecting softly from the brass hinge of his telescope case nearby. He opens the notebook to a dog-eared page, the one that holds a poem by Auden he's read quietly to himself, again and again, on nights like this. The room is small but feels expansive in the quiet, walls lined with dark wood shelves, soft with the dust of decades. Everything is order and comfort. Graphite pencils in a smooth clay cup, an envelope of newspaper cuttings, a single photograph of his parents tucked behind a globe. Sagan breathes in deeply as the kettle whistles, a bright, brief interruption, then is silenced by his practiced hand. Tea poured, the mug warms his palms as he settles in, eyes tracing the lines of ink on the page, mouth moving in silent rhythm, barely louder than the sound of his own heart. Outside the tall window, the sky turns from deep blue to the pale graphite of nightfall. He glances occasionally at the telescope, its body cool and patient near the glass, as if waiting for him to finish his reading. There is no hurry. He reads slowly, letting the words echo in the small chamber of his chest, stories of distance, connection, loneliness, and wonder. Every object has its own history, its own small devotion, the brass eyepiece he wipes with soft cloth, the gentle way he folds the blanket after standing, the care he gives to every instrument, every habit, none of it for show. It's the comfort of returning, night after night, to these same motions. These rituals are not grand, but they tether him, offering a quiet steadiness against the immensity he contemplates. It would have been easy to lose himself only in the vast, the mathematical, the cold geometry of cosmos. Yet in these private hours, Carl Sagan anchors himself not only to stars, but to the grain of wood beneath his notebook, the heat of porcelain in his hands, the hushed cadence of recited verse. There are no spectators now, just the slow unfolding of presence, a kind of prayer not spoken, but lived. Hands moving in the hush of evening, Carl lifts the worn lid of his notebook, letting the rough edge of its cardboard crease catch against his thumb. Each motion is anything but hurried. He slides a pen from the pocket of his faded corduroy jacket, its fabric brushed smooth at the elbows from years pressed against wood and paper. The lamp's amber glow pools quietly on his desk, gathering in the valleys pressed by elbows, spreading across the stray notes that rest beside a chipped teacup. Every page of the notebook feels dense with silent history, the faint scent of graphite and paper, the weight of untold nights. The habit repeats, a page turned, the slow exhale of breath. Carl's handwriting drifts in measured lines, each letter forming a bridge from his internal vastness to the physical world of ink and fiber. Outside, winter presses cool against the glass, but in this room, devotion manifests as warmth. The heat from his cup rising into the space between his hands and the small spiral galaxies drawn along the notebook's margins. These gestures, repeated night after night, become a kind of quiet ritual, not for performance, not to be seen, but to hold something infinite in closeness, vessel to light, within the ordinary stillness. The hum of the observatory equipment floats from the next room, soft as breath. Carl listens with an inward ear, letting the low sound root him in this moment, his feet steady on the worn floorboards, slippers muffled by the old rug. The friction of pen against paper, the faint click of ceramic when he sets down his cup, all so unremarkable if seen from a distance, yet here infused with reverence. Each act is both ending and beginning, a silent offering, repeated into the dark, not to change the world, but to tend to wonder quietly inside himself. In these moments, time thickens. The ordinary act, like replacing the telescope's lens cap with fingertips that have felt frost, carries a kind of surrender. There is no rush to finish, only a gentle allowing. The movements are not interruptions of the night, but invitations for meaning to fill the gaps. The cold air through the open window, the small sound of pages being closed again, the way he breathes before standing to look once more at the sky. It all feels like a listening, not for answers, but for a presence only felt in the repetition. His devotion, hidden in the simplest gestures, is received without announcement. In these small nightly tasks, the care for tools, the quiet tidying, the drawing of constellations in pencil, Carl gives himself to wonder, drawing the cover over his telescope, placing a hand briefly on the cold metal, he offers the evening back. He lets himself be led by the rhythm of ordinary things, unhurried and whole, until the only thing left is the gentle flutter of a notebook closing, as one more night is given to luminous stillness. Near the window of his study, the wood of the desk is smoothed by decades. Papers are stacked in careful piles, journal articles from the National Academy of Sciences, notes in his left-handed scroll, a half-opened letter about the Viking missions. A mug, chipped at the rim, holds the rich scent of black tea cooling beside the mess. Carl's hand drifts from the teacup to a well-thumbed notebook. Pages carry the weight of questions. Is there life on Titan? How do amino acids form in the cold, dark void? What light would glint off methane lakes? Hours collapse and expand while sunlight fades and a desk lamp flickers on. Evenings often begin with the slow rustle of planetary images, photographs sent back by Mariner, outlines of Martian valleys, a smudge that might be dust or could be hope. Outside, the night cools against the window glass. The clatter of keys carries into the dark as he drafts another manuscript, lines crossing and recrossing with each revision. The house hums quietly, the heater ticks, an old book shifts on a shelf, the world holds its breath. He reviews spectral readings, the kind that once left entire rooms confused. To him, they are a kind of music. His focus is unbroken. Instead of a rush, it is steady, a patient circling around patterns in data, always repeating, always returning. In notebooks, planetary atmospheres are broken down, not as abstractions, but as lists. Carbon dioxide, nitrogen, the traces of methane. There is no hurry, only the routine of coming back, looking closer, asking again. He reads aloud, just below a whisper, an experiment design, a paragraph on extremophiles, a quote from a colleague. With each rereading, facts become softer, more personal. The science reshapes, not to fit answers, but to leave space for more questions. In these small acts, the weighing of evidence, the slow revision of a page, the methodical scanning of photos, he lets the immensity of the cosmos shrink to the smallest gesture. Cold air seeps through a window pane, and the scent of graphite mingles with tea. There is humility in the way he circles his findings, uncertain, steady, gently amazed at how much remains unknown. Every so often, he glances up toward the shelves lined with models. A battered globe, a meteorite fragment, a faded lab notebook from graduate school. Around him, starlight spills quietly onto the floor. There is quiet in this room, but also devotion, a patience that honors questions as sacred and genius not as brilliance, but as returning again and again to ask, to wonder, to stay. Outside the window, the world is quiet, only the faint shimmer of city lights on the horizon, the rest dimmed by a winter hush. Sagan's hand drifts once more across the notebook, pages soft with years of turning. Each word set down with care, lead pencil filling the faint ridges in the paper. The desk lamp hums softly, its warm circle working against the darkness. There is no rush, just a kind of reverence for what the night makes possible. The glow is enough to see by, not enough to startle. His pulse steadies with the measured scratch of graphite. A chipped cup, still holding the last bit of tea, anchors his gaze. He lifts it. The ceramic is cool now. No steam left, only a gentle weight against his palm. The room smells faintly of oolong and old books, the wooden shelves watching over years of study. It is here after midnight that his thoughts move most freely, winding around the unknown, pressing gently on the edge of what he can carry. He pauses, letting his thumb rest on a line of writing. No one is watching. The process is wordless for minutes at a time. Obsession, in moments like these, does not burn so much as it glows, steady and consuming, but never wild. There is wonder in pressing on, chasing down a question until it becomes a small, clear shape in the darkness. It is the same force that drew him as a boy to library aisles and the frosted drawers of the Science Museum. But it is older now, quieter, worn smooth with repetition. Some nights he will look up from his work and realize an hour has passed, marked only by the movement of heat in the radiators, the shifting patterns of light on the wood floor. He remembers without deciding to remember. The time's obsession pulled him too tightly. When the urge to know edged out sleep, meals, even kindness to himself. Yet with age has come a softer clarity. The fire for discovery can easily tip past balance if given no rest. Obsession can invite light, but also burn away the boundary between devotion and exhaustion. the Buddha spoke of a path that steers between extremes, neither denying nor indulging every urge. Sagan doesn't think in doctrine, but some residue of this wisdom lingers in his rhythm now. He returns to the warmth of the mug, to the feel of cotton at his elbow on the desk, senses grounding him back into his body. The pursuit still matters, but is no longer all-consuming. The air in the study feels heavier now, thick with quiet accomplishment. Evenings spent like this, half in the world and half in contemplation, remind him genius and obsession belong to the same spectrum. The difference lies not in what is pursued, but in how often one remembers to set the pencil down, to breathe, to look at the sky through dark glass. A mug still warm from the kettle sits on the desk, its rim faintly chipped from years of use. The steam gathers, then drifts slow into the corner lamplight, dissolving into the quiet. Most evenings for Carl finished this way. Notebooks spread, telescope by the window, but the chair opposite his empty. There were letters he could have written to a family member far away or a friend's birthday, gently missed, but the days blurred into research and the stare of starlight on glass. In the hallway, a photograph, one from a family vacation decades earlier, feet in cool ocean foam, arms slung around shoulders, Sagan's sleeves rolled up just enough to show he'd been skimming rocks. He rarely took breaks, not really. Rest was something remembered but rarely claimed. Dinner with the family sometimes meant his mind drifted, even as he poured the water or sliced bread. He carried pencils from table to desk, always making notes for later, always thinking another idea would wait just until he had more time, a soft rug under his feet as he crossed the bedroom. Anne Druyan, his wife, would later describe the late work hours, the quiet way he'd slip into bed after midnight, carefully so as not to wake her. Sometimes he would whisper a thought about something he'd seen in the sky. A new moon, a distant return of Saturn, the hum of possibility just outside the window. But sleep didn't come easily. The mind kept running, priorities tangled, rest deferred, and simple ease given up for another page read, another calculation made. Books stacked neatly on his nightstand, most unfinished. The hum of old radiators, the slight chill in the room as night deepens. Early interviews and memories recall how Sagan set aside friendships, declining invitations to lectures or summer picnics, always for the reason that the cosmos had another signal, another secret, waiting if he just looked a little longer. He did not complain, it was not that kind of sacrifice, but in the quiet, some warmth was gently left behind, traded for the solace of another question, another horizon. An aging teacup, windows reflecting city lights, the persistent rustle of notebook paper turning slowly. Relationships, rest, comfort, they faded into the background, all for the hope that in piecing together the vastness above, some small sense of meaning down here might finally settle in his lap. The mug in Carl's hand had cooled, the rim still faintly holding the memory of warmth, the pattern of blue stars fading in the lamp's soft cast. His fingers moved gently over the edge, pausing, absent-minded, lost in the habit of turning it around and around, the small surrender of heat to air. A lesson every evening that nothing can be kept as it is. Even a favorite cup cannot stay warm forever. It's always letting go, little by little. On his desk, the leather notebook sat open, some pages filled with diagrams of galaxies, others with notes about light scattered through time. The ink, deep navy, sometimes blurring at the edges, marked where his hand had rested, or where a thought had stayed a bit too long, the paper bore faint creases from being pressed and repurposed, reused because nothing was wasted in this room. Each page was space given up so that wonder could come through. The telescope by the window showed traces of frost along its metal edges. The act of uncovering it night after night was a small loss, a blanket of security pulled back, exposing the lens to the quiet cold. The sky asked for surrender always. Starlight would not reveal itself to anyone clinging too tightly to warmth or comfort or certainty. Carl's breath, slow and nearly invisible in the winter room, mingled with the hush. Giving up the warmth of inside, he would lean forward, bring his eye to the glass, and let something larger fill the emptiness left by release. In that moment, the room grew larger, the boundaries dissolving with each surrendered comfort. Security exchanged for awe. A soft chair traded for the hard floor, a closed notebook open to the dark, with only the shallow pool of desk lamp and the faintest shadow of his own hand. He sometimes paused, a pen hovering above the margin, to notice how each insight was made possible by some letting go. Each mystery arrived only as he handed over the hope for an answer. Each new world revealed itself after certainty was gently set aside. There was humility threaded through all of these evenings, a willingness to be emptied, to make space for the unknown, to lose the small life, its warmth, its neatness, its easy pleasure, so the infinite could edge gently in. It was never dramatic, never heroic, just slow, faithful release, losing what was held tight to be held in something vaster and unseen. In that dim room, Carl learned that to make contact with wonder, he couldn't clutch what made him comfortable. The invitation was always to surrender, not a single time, but in tiny, patient decisions, offering up warmth for starlight, certainty for longing, the known for the possible. Each loss quietly, letting more of the universe spill in some nights. The wind creaked the old wooden sill. He'd close the notebook gently, sit back, empty-handed, feeling the quiet stretching out all around. What he had let go returned in new form, a wider sense of belonging, a faith that emptiness itself could hold him if he trusted the slow unraveling. It was true in the sky. It was true in life. What was lost was never wasted. It was only making room for more. The thin rim of a mug warms Carl's palms as evening gathers at the edge of the windowsill. In his later years, the quiet inside his study grows deeper, echoing the hush of a body adjusting to limits, stepping more lightly, setting down heavy books with measured care. He sits in the same worn chair, the one that always seems to know his shape, surrounded by the soft clutter of years, faded notes, stray envelopes, and the spines of journals lined up like sentinels. The light glows faintly on paper, not as bright as before. Each page turned feels slower, the texture of the paper more pronounced against his skin. There is a careful rhythm to the way he moves now. Breath followed by thought, thought followed by breath. His pen moves steadily, though sometimes the hand trembles, a reminder that nothing, not even stars, stands fixed. A wool sweater lays draped over his lap, the fabric worn smooth where his fingers often rest. Outside, the branches sway, and the sound of them tapping the glass draws his focus outward, reminding him that the world continues, patient and unhurried. Even as illness settles into his days, shaping the space between ordinary moments, he does not abandon the work. He gathers manuscripts, gently annotating margins. The smell of old paper rises as books stack higher on the little side table by his arm. The lamp casts oval shadows onto his notes. There are pauses now, pauses for breath, for quiet, sometimes for closing his eyes. The small, sacred habits persist. Warming tea, straightening a photograph, running a fingertip along the spine of a favorite collection of essays. Each act is an anchor, tying memory to presence. He learns to dwell in patience, to let limitation become a field for gentleness rather than frustration. The universe, he thinks, is no less vast simply because he no longer peers through a telescope each night. Intimacy with the cosmos, like intimacy with the self, can be found in the slow observance of shadow, in the arrangement of everyday things, in the shared breath with a room filled with silence. There is humility stitched into these hours. He finds himself working not for the wide applause, but for the quiet company of wonder. Sometimes a single voice on the radio becomes a whole world. Sometimes the steam from a chipped mug is enough to stir gratitude. Greatness, he remembers, was never in the pace or the scale, but in the act of noticing. The ordinary made sacred through attention. No achievement feels as important as this calm. The room softens around him as evening deepens. In the gentle hush, every small ritual is as full as a sky of stars, the meaning not diminished, but magnified by the narrowing circle of light. The window glass was cool to Carl's fingers as he leaned in, watching the deep night soften the outlines of the backyard. The trees he once climbed as a young father now stood as tall, familiar shadows, their branches stretched, silent and unhurried, under the watch of distant planets. The same telescope, its brass edges dulled by decades of touch, waited nearby with the steadiness of ritual each night. He still uncovered it with careful hands, slower than before, but steadier, too. There was a wool blanket always folded at the arm of the chair. Its weight was familiar, the texture unchanging even as his skin thinned with time. He placed it across his knees, feeling the warmth gather, remembering all the quiet hours wrapped inside that softness, looking out into a universe that moved without rush or reason. The kettle hummed from another room, the promise of tea unchanged, papers, so many pages, rested quietly in ordered piles on his side table, letters from colleagues and students, draft after draft of questions scribbled in the margins, the handwriting now shakier in the half-light. He slid a page free, the paper rougher, maybe. Or maybe his fingertips just more aware of life's substance with every year. The air inside the study was thick but gentle, filled with the faintest trace of his cologne, shelves of old books, a world lived in but never conquered. The ticking of a clock measured time in waves, not seconds, echoing the rhythm of a breath rather than the urgency of achievement. Carl's gaze would linger at the seam between curtain and glass where the darkness deepened. He reflected on his own impermanence the same way he once spoke of distant stars, gently, without fear or hurry. It was the simplicity of transition that soothed him. Just as night becomes morning or the candle burns down, everything moves. The Tibetan monks spoke of the dissolution of the self as a passage, not an ending. He had read it many times, fingers tracing the dog-eared pages, and found a peace in the idea. He would sit with his tea, feeling the mug's uneven ceramic, and let his mind wander beyond memory. There was no need to strive in these moments. The old anxieties about legacy, about discovery had quieted, replaced by a patient attention to each breath and each small moment. Ram Dass once wrote about the art of presence, the sacredness of simply being here, even as the body ages and releases. Carl understood that now in the slow ritual of letting go, he was no longer charting the outer cosmos, but drinking in the reality of this moment, the weight of his own hand, the hush of a house that had sheltered his questions and his wonder until the final dusk. He watched the steam curl from his mug, the same way he'd watched the galaxies swirl through the lens. There was honest comfort in surrendering to the softness of this transition, not a step away from belonging, but a gentle return to the rhythm behind all things. There's an old desk lamp in the corner, glass shade glowing pale on a circle of graph paper. The desk itself is scattered, ink pens lined in a neat row, a mug cooling beside a book marked halfway with a receipt. Sagan's hand hovers for a moment, then settles on a blank page. His thumb presses the spine, grounding him. He inhales gingerly the faint powder of paper and type. He breathes out. He would imagine these evenings quietly, sitting in his modest study, eyes flicking between words and the dark beyond the window. One winter night, the sound of a radiator hissing below the frame, he began to map a journey to Alpha Centauri, not as an exercise in fiction, but as the slow practice of wonder. Each line on the page recorded possibilities. How many years, how much fuel, what loneliness might reveal. The air was punctuated only by the quiet scratching of his pencil and the creak of a floorboard as he shifted in his chair visible against the frost. His breath left the outline of a question. There was no soundtrack for these imagined crossings, just the interior hush and the soft hum of curiosity. He'd mark an arc across the page, tracing decades, technology, how long the silence of interstellar space may stretch. He liked to run these experiments not for answers, but for the expansion, noticing what the mind does when prompted to think larger, slower. Sometimes, in documented interviews, he would close his eyes and narrate the sensation of drifting between stars. The absence of gravity, the way dark felt even darker at that imagined velocity. The room held his voice low and level. He spoke of communication, what stories earthlings might send to the unknown, what music or mathematics would mean to beings that had never touched water or felt the press of stone. Most evenings ended simply. A notebook closed with a soft sigh, hands folded in his lap until the temperature of the room changed, and it was time for sleep all along. There was no rush to these journeys, only the gentle layering of questions. Each scenario was an act of translation, making cosmic distance feel just a bit more intimate. The sounds around him, the gentle click of the heat, a drawer sliding shut, became markers of peaceful return. The body grounding itself after wandering the vast, imagined dark the lamp in the study grows dimmer, but Carl Sagan's hand lingers over his notebook. Flannel sleeves graze the page as he closes it, quietly marking the end of an evening's thoughts. There's the faint scent of graphite on his fingertips, the edge of pages folded back with gentle care, as though each small crease held a memory of past nights and their own slow revelations. The window carries the hum of distant traffic, dulled by midnight air. He breathes and lets his gaze travel up, beyond the lamp's soft orbit, into the stretch of shadowed ceiling and out, by thought, into the steady, velvet silence above his house. For a breath, there's only the shape of his own reflection on glass, layered atop the faint starglow above the treetops. The old telescope waits, its cool metal body a steady, silent companion. Carl touches the instrument, feeling how it grounds him, one hand curved around dials smoothed by years of careful turning. The room's air shifts faintly as he cracks the window. Cold drifts in, and the wooden frame gives off a dry, comforting scent. No rush to capture the night, just an openness, an invitation to witness what is and wonder about what could be. As he sits in the chair, knees drawn close, a sense of the infinite opens not as a force, but as a gentle possibility. It is not about grasping the whole cosmos, only about touching the edge of it with a mind willing to imagine what lies just past the visible. The ticking clock, the soft swell of heat pipes, and the faint rustle of his own woolen socks across the floor remind him that the extraordinary always enters on ordinary ground. He lets an idea drift through. All it takes is the willingness to see things differently, to expect beauty in small shapes, to assume meaning could appear with the simplest gesture. Imagination is not a departure from the real, but the soft bridge between what has been touched and what waits to be discovered. Nothing magical, just a change of angle, a slight shift of breath. Outside, faint starlight flickers beyond his reach. The spiral of Andromeda is invisible tonight, but Carl imagines its path, tracing it softly in air with his fingertip. The gesture anchors him. It is enough to remember that scale does not divide what is possible. The mind travels. The soul lingers, holding both the limits of his vantage point and the fullness of what could exist far beyond it. This is where potential stretches between worlds. The body in the chair, warm and slow, and the mind moving gently beyond the edges of habit, softly assuming just for tonight, that the unknown is as close as the next intention. Under these layers, wonder and belonging meet. The difference between dreaming and knowing feels very thin, just the width of a quiet moment, or the slip of a notebook across a wool blanket, or the invitation of cold night air under a half-open window. There is a quiet truth in the last weeks of Carl Sagan's life. After decades of returning nightly to the stars, his days were spent in gentle seclusion with Anne and their family. In a quiet hospital room, sunlight came through thick glass at a different angle than at home. The routine of tea-making stopped. The notes, which once filled his study in Ithaca, stayed closed in drawers. A hospital blanket replaced the wool throw he once folded over his knees. Nurses moved softly, shoes muted along the edge of linoleum. There was always an IV pole beside him, its presence steady as any instrument in an observatory. Outside, December pressed quietly against the window, making pale shapes on the ledge and sill. Breath grew slow, sometimes barely audible even to those closest. The rhythm of the heart monitor marked time, steadier than his own body could manage now. There was no music in the room, only the hush of inhaling and exhaling, broken by the muted swish of doors in the hallway. Family voices, gentle and low, filled the space with a kind of warmth papered over worry. Each visitor touched his hand or brushed his shoulder, a palpable gesture, clear and rooted. Anne would sometimes set a book beside his pillow, the slightest sound of paper against fabric. In these last days, there was nothing to do except wait, to watch, to listen to the presence of a man who had spent his life holding wonder. His eyes, alert even through exhaustion, sometimes flickered with that familiar light when someone spoke of science or of love. Meals went untouched. The small chipped cup, so familiar in his study, was replaced by a hospital-issued mug, smooth and white, changed out every morning. Time drifted without urgency. A final winter morning arrived. He died quietly on December 20, 1996, at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center in Seattle. No speeches, no ceremony, just the presence of those he loved, the weight of a life slowly relinquished. Afterward there was silence, a sacred quiet, punctuated only by the slow folding of the hospital sheets, the closing of a door. He was buried at Lakeview Cemetery in Ithaca, New York, beneath the winter sky he had so often studied. The ground was cold and firm, with earth pressed gently around his grave, a patch of grass, a faint dusting of snow along the stones. There were few words spoken at the burial. The landscape itself seemed to remember. The trees stood still. Even the wind moved softly over the simple marker. Nearby, a telescope in a silent house gathered frost on its lens, and the legacy of Carl Sagan became an echo in the world he once spoke to so gently and so well. The teacup sat quietly on the desk, its rim cooling in the hush after midnight. Around it, the wooden surface held remnants of past evenings, delicate tea rings, scattered salt from a pretzel, the faded mark where some science magazine once rested open for hours. Light from the desk lamp was thin, filtering through a shade Carl Sagan had owned since the early 60s. Shadows moved slowly on the walls, reaching outward and then returning each time he shifted in his chair. His hand lingered on the worn leather of the notebook, tracing the grooves left by years of writing. Each page was filled with diagrams, simple calculations, bits of poetry penciled along the margins, things not meant for anyone else. The sound of a distant radiator nudged into the silence, gentle and pulsing, blending with the steady hum from the observatory equipment down the hall. The notebook rested on his lap, heavy and familiar. Carl's breathing became slower as he reread an old letter. The paper, soft with age, carried the scent of library